First of all, I want you to understand that this revolution, it wasn't for Europe or Russia, or it was about human dignity, and it was about self-respect. The same we have today. We wasn't lucky to have such a neighbor who are dreaming to restore an empire. That's why today we have to stay not only against our one small local dictator as it was in winter. Today we have to stay against Putin's government and Putin's army. Ukraine was a peaceful country for more than 23 years. For last half a year, you must read a lot about how divided are we, what different languages do we speak, and so on. But for 23 years, this country lived peacefully, without no conflicts on the basement of, on the ground of religion or ethnic, whatever. But we had a conflict on the ground of freedom, because Putin's government couldn't stand us as a successful country. Because if Ukraine would succeed, it will destroy the idea of empire. No one needs empire if you can be successful in a normal country. That's why conflict, war, military aggression was created by Putin's government on our border and in our country. And when you hear some phrases that it's a crisis in Ukraine, please, friends, there is no crisis in Ukraine. It's a military conflict or it's a Putin's war, because it's brought to us from outside, and it's continuing to be created by the outside government. I was asked to share my experience, lessons of Maidan. And the first lesson of revolution that we learned is self-organization. Because on Maidan we went through the same phases that our country and society is going through now. We started with a peaceful protest, with dancing and singing, and we ended with a real war with injured and killed people. Today, numbers of killed people is thousands, and we are still in the process of evolution, of realizing what's going on in our country. Self-organization. We created parallel structures on the center of our city. We created actually a state in the state. We had hospitals and libraries. Our volunteers started with the kitchen and ended with IT and self-defense. Today, in this war in Ukraine, we do have the same. Volunteers are buying everything, from medicine to cars, even plane. But you cannot win a war on crowdfunding. What is actually happening now in Ukraine? Our army was destroyed for 20 years, and we rebuilt it, not actually, but in the process of rebuilding it in a very short period of time. But you couldn't stay with this crowdfunding against a professional army of a country where they were getting ready for the war for years, where be ready for a war was a politic for a country, a policy of a country. But I believe that this our capability, the thing that we can self-organize and create everything that we need, even without politicians, that was helpful. But the next lesson that we learned from revolution is that we actually do need politicians. But we need our politicians. Not the people from yesterday, but from the past, but the people who really will represent people's interests. Politicians who will talk for us, not who will speak for us, not for oligarchs or whatever of their personal interests. And I hope that this next election that we will have in Ukraine will give us a chance to have these politicians. The other lesson from Maidan, from revolution, is that we do not have to rely on West. I was speaking a lot during this half a year to Western politicians, media, and young people, and I felt their personal support and human sympathy to us in Ukraine. But what I've seen in Europe is kind of dictatorship of bureaucracy. And it's very hard to go through it. And I understand that that's the reason why it couldn't be efficient and so fast as we need to stop this conflict at the beginning. Because the situation and the moment now is actually the historical moment. The world rules were changed, as you know. Respect to the borders, like borders were disrespected. And I'm sure that international situation will be changed the nearest time because of this aggression. Because what we have now, it's not a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It's a try to restore this empire, maybe as Reagan said, empire of evil based on lies and violence. And on our side, we have tried to create this new country of a free people. In my country, my ancestors fight for hundreds of years to have this chance to create this country. And you have to understand that we will never, ever give up. We paid too much for hundreds of years and for this half a year or a year. And we cannot go back. We want this prosperous, independent state. And that's why I'm calling this war, this conflict, a war of values. And you know what values are on which side. And the question now is where the border between these values will be. Will it be in Ukraine, in Poland, in Kazakhstan? As Putin said, this state doesn't exist. No one knows what can stop him. And we understand that it's not obviously a diplomacy. We go through very hard challenges this winter. But we won. Our dictator failed. And what we've learned it's that we have to believe in a victory. And we do believe. I think that this next dictator is on turn. And you here as representatives of your countries, as open-minded, free-thinking people, you can be a part of this historical moment, of these historical changes. Because every country who stayed with Ukraine is staying with the human values. And if you want to help, just make sure that your country recognized our events as aggression from Russia. If you can influence and conduct some medicine or military or human help, that would be great. And be with us in creating the next miracle, a state of the future, a country of the future, a modern state, which we will create together with you. Thank you. I will be happy to answer all your questions, and let's continue our discussion.
Thank you, Yulia. Thank you, Yulia, for sharing your emotions with us, because emotions are really important. They're critical, and critical not only for our souls, but sometimes for decision-making as well. And with that, I'd like to pass the floor to Giga Bakeria. Yeah, it's up to you where would you like to speak. And actually, you know, as a food for thought, I was reviewing the Western media this morning, and I was seeing absolutely different views after the yesterday's events in Ukraine, and the captures, the season of the Ukrainian army, the captures of the air spaces, air drones in Lugansk and Donetsk. And the New York Times, Ben Judah specifically said that now the time has come whether to arm Ukraine or give it up completely. And if you've seen the recent piece by Ann Applebaum in Washington Post, who is asking a direct question, is it too hysterical to think about the war in Europe? And with that, Giga, we'd really appreciate your perspective, your regional perspective and the view on the security and the instability in the region.
Thank you so much, and I want to again thank the organizers of this event for this great opportunity for all of us to discuss very important topics, even the tragic ones, as tragic as they are. And I want to thank the previous speakers so much. It's very hard to talk after this so genuinely emotional speech, also very comprehensive on most of the issues, including what is at stake. I think in a list of the recent publications, I just saw in the morning a letter of Polish intellectuals to the world. I think it's right on the spot what is at stake, with again very tragic historic parallel legitimately brought up of the discussion in the Europe before the World War II. And I think as alarming as it is, there are legitimate parallels with that discussion, and not very encouraging ones sometimes, but I'm still hopeful that the history will not repeat itself this time. And let me again say that without any too much dramatism, I think we all owe our complete moral and whatever we can support for Ukrainian people who have definitely inspired all of us, starting from Maidan. I think what we saw there was something nobody expected was possible and doable, and what was rightly explained here, without political class, without political machine at the top, just civic activism at the very best of it in a post-Soviet country. Real inspiration and real, in a good way, envy for me as a citizen of my country, who also had a peaceful revolution, but what I saw at Maidan was something I haven't seen before. I think even on symbolic level, people, for the first time, died for a European flag. And for their dignity, as it was said, for their liberty and their country's independence, but that's the European idea. So that's why I think it must be deeply valued. It's, of course, very unfortunate that many of our Ukrainian friends who are in government or in politics couldn't come, but for completely understandable reasons. So, to say in short, I think there are overwhelming, at minimum, reasons, moral reasons to support the Ukrainian people's struggle and to consider it very important, but I'll try to be very short and say what is at stake together with moral issue or besides the pure moral issues. I think it's not an exaggeration, and the previous speaker has said that what is at stake now is a defining moment for not only Ukraine or regional security, but I would say for the whole European security. Because if Putin is successful this time, not only it, for the first stage, immediately endangers the statehood of all post-Soviet countries. And I say and underline all post-Soviet, regardless of their affiliation with NATO or EU at the moment. My country will be probably first at stake to finish the job they have been unable to fulfill in 2008 invasion. In our region, there is a very effective instrument to subdue Azerbaijan. It's a Karabakh conflict, which Russia, Kremlin have been keeping as an effective potential tool. Moldova will be the next, and there are ways to make Transnistria completely swallow Moldova in a black hole. And Baltic states won't be at peace for long, for sure. I think at minimum what we can say, Putin's success in Ukraine will, if not crush, will shake to the core the biggest and most important project of the 20th century, Europe whole and free and at peace. And that is not an exaggeration. I think what we see in Putin's action is another part of his great revisionist agenda. He has been very clear from the very beginning, from his Munich speech and then from the subsequent steps, that he thinks that security architecture in Europe is to the detriment of Russian Federation, and it must be revised. And this has not been taken seriously, at least until now, in Brussels or in Washington. I think what we see, all his steps during the last decade now fall into one logical chain: invasion of my country, constant threats and destabilization of Moldova and Baltic states, denouncing security treaties throughout this way, starting from end of 2007, and now invasion of Ukraine. These are all separate battles. And yes, I forgot, even on economy or soft power battles, I mean, trying to work very hard to engage with Europe energy-wise. And on soft power, formulating this idea that Europe West is decadent and is a threat to traditional values, and Russia is a protector of these traditional values. These are all separate battles, but of the same war. And this is the war against the outcome of Cold War, against the results of 1989, 1991. This is where we are, and this must be acknowledged. I think West, free world, has taken each of these crises or each of these challenges from Putin, let's say, at one. And each time we have seen that there was a clear attempt, but not by all, but by many, to find the circumstantial excuses or some local reasons to justify, understand, have empathy for Russian actions. We have heard too many times that NATO enlargement was genuinely, legitimately, or semi-legitimately threatening Russia's security, or it was legitimately perceived as such, that Russia was a former great power, now fallen one, and we must understand its pains at lost former glory, that Russian-speaking minorities were prosecuted, and that has forced Kremlin to act, and so they were victims. So in short, there was a fundamental concept that engaging with Putin's Russia was the only way to keep stability, and that was the future policy for European stability. And that, to paraphrase that, Putin is a difficult partner, but he's a partner. That was a fundamental concept. And I think that misperception and wrong conclusions have greatly contributed to the current tragic situation in Ukraine and tragic situation for European security. We must say once and for all, first, having some kind of philosophical empathy towards those who are nostalgic about the empire evil is morally wrong and pragmatically wrong. There is no sense and no interest for the free world in that kind of vision. And again, that kind of vision brings up the before World War II Nazi Germany's parallels and the same understanding that it was post-Weimar Germany was hurt by the past, and we must understand their concerns. This is completely wrong. Now, and after Yanukovych, I think this whole notion about NATO as a legitimate threat should be put to rest. We all know that Yanukovych declared and practically implemented a halt on Ukraine's NATO integration. He gave Putin a Black Sea fleet, extended lease for Black Sea fleet, a crucial security issue for Putin. He declared Russia the state language. He passed a law in the parliament, something very sensitive and emotional for Putin, as it has been claimed. There were, as the previous speaker said, zero problems with Russian-speaking people in Ukraine. Nothing. This is all false premises. We must once and for all accept the simple fact that Putin's confrontation with the West, his revisionism, is the very core of his regime. And suppressing sovereignty of its neighbors, and especially suppressing the successful attempts to have a modern liberal democracy, is just one important stage in this revision. And that's where we are. And I think it was absolutely right that Maidan has accelerated. I think Putin would be against the Ukrainian independence in any case, as I have said, despite Yanukovych's huge compromises to the detriment of Ukrainian national interest, he has still squeezed him until the very end to force him to commit treason and to abandon the association agreement. By the way, I want to recall that some of our European friends have been telling us for years that we must forget about NATO, at least not concentrate on it, and focus on association agreement and Eastern Partnership as the way forward, and that Russia will be just fine with this. So coming back to what was my point, is that this should be once and for all accepted, that the defeating West is the core goal of Putin, and he will not stop until he's seriously and consistently pushed back. So I'll move in short to what I believe are the immediate steps to be made. First, I think it's crucial to militarily help all those who are resisting Putin's actions in the region. Now it's Ukraine. Delivering effective arms and weapons to Ukraine is a crucial step, both militarily, because it influences the military theater, and politically. I think Chancellor Merkel deserves a lot of praise for taking a lot of domestic political risks in pushing for the sanctions, but her response to the question, which was recently posed, will there be a delivery of weapons to Ukraine, is quite a disastrous message, because she said they won't be delivered, and then when she was pushed by a journalist, she elaborated and said that, well, if we do that, then there'll be a war. And this response shows that there is still lack of comprehension of the quality of the challenge to European security. Second, I think moving to qualitatively different and new level of sanctions against Russia. And when I talk about that, I mean not only the banking sector, which is allegedly connected to the ruling regime and Putin, but the complete and comprehensive action against financial sector, and they're restricting their ability to capitalize on stock exchange, first and foremost. Then the whole banking sector, the energy, oil, first of all, which is much larger income for Russian Federation than the gas, and it's easier for Europe to digest that change. And last but not least, it's not last but very important one, is also the scandalous situation when there is still in a pipeline a delivery of military equipment and military training ongoing of Russian forces, and we all know what we're talking about. I think there should be an absolute freeze on transfer of all new technologies and military technologies to Russia. This is both important as a political message and for practical reasons. Then on Euro-Atlantic integration, once and for all, there should be a very clear message, and now there's a summit in Wales, that the road to NATO membership is open to Ukraine and Georgia and any aspirant. After Bucharest summit, we have heard repeated statements that Russia has no veto power on this direction, but it was absolutely clear, and this message has convinced nobody, unfortunately, that actually there is a veto power, and this is a crucial element. And really, the last thing is that pushing for democratic and pro-Western forces around the neighborhood, creating the democracy belt against Russia, is of vital importance. As we already said, twice the Maidan, that's why it was so dangerous for Putin, that a successful liberal democracy and successful modernization of the countries this is rightly understood by Putin as a threat, as an advancement of Western interest, as a threat for his regime inside. And last, I cannot resist by not noticing that, and it's deeply regrettable for me as a citizen of Georgia and as somebody who's in politics, the absence of any political figure of ruling political class at this discussion. I think, as I said, it's our moral duty, and we remember how Ukrainians and President Yushchenko supported us when we had our challenge, our invasion. But also, it's a deeply harmful policy for our national interest. I think it's our, first and foremost, our national interest to be part of this struggle and to be part of the next enlargement of the free world. That's Georgian people's choice, and I still hope that this understanding will come to the whole political class in Georgia, and definitely I can confirm that this consensus is very strong in Georgian public. Again, very hard to speak after such a speaker as you were, but I hope that main message is clear. We have overwhelming and overlapping reasons, both moral and practical, to defend the future of Europe whole and free and at peace in Ukraine right now, and this is a decisive moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Giga, for this excellent remarks and outlining the key messages and the action points, what actually can be done. And I think it's an excellent segue to our next speaker, Andrei Larionov, whom I'd like to reiterate the question that Giga raised in his remarks. What is the end goal for Putin? Is it indeed seeing the defeat of the West, or there is something else? And I think, Andrei, you are one of the best to answer that question.
All right, thank you, Katya. Good morning. All right, after these two very rich speeches, my duty today is just to put some events that are known to you and that we've been talking this morning in more general historic and logical context in the framework, how it has been seen and is being seen not only from Ukraine, not only from Georgia, not only from the international community, but from the authors of this crisis and of this war, from the eyes of the Kremlin and from Mr. Putin. It's my unfortunate duty, but we need to understand this. First of all, I would start from the title in this panel discussion that has not been fortunately pronounced by Katya, but has been published in our programs. I would read it, The Situation in Ukraine / Ukrainian Crisis and Spillover in the Region. This is a very popular title that you can hear, you can read everywhere in the world as a discussion about Ukrainian crisis or crisis in Ukraine. It is totally wrong. And this is a result of the very effective Kremlin's propaganda and actually some kind of the elements of the hybrid war that is being waged against Ukraine, against Georgia, against many other nations. Is it just portraying the attack and aggression and war against Ukraine as an internal crisis in Ukraine? And if you listen to Mr. Putin, he always says, okay, Russia is absolutely not involved in that. That's the internal crisis in Ukraine, which is totally a lie, which is absolutely a lie. As they tried 6 years ago to portray the Russian-Georgian war, the Russian aggression against Georgia, Russian attack against Georgia, Russian intervention into Georgia as war in South Ossetia, or Georgian war, or crisis in Georgia. This is very clear and a very some kind of clear special operations that is trying to use semantics, some kind of to program some kind of brains around the world, how to think about different things. So that is why I would call it everybody not to use, this is absolutely wrong, this is Putin's propaganda approach, but use the correct title, the correct name to the events that we're having right now. This is a Russian war against Ukraine, or Mr. Putin's war against Ukraine, which would be even more correct. Second point that I will discuss a little bit later, This is a war against Ukraine is only introductory chapter of a much larger event that has been prepared for years, that is being implemented, that is Kremlin propaganda is telling Russian people and those who would like to listen to it. It is just introductory chapters of the Fourth World War. Once again, each word is very important. This is the Fourth World War. They come the Cold War, about which Giga was talking a few minutes ago, as the Third World War that finished some kind of more than 20 years ago. And what is going right now, it's the Fourth World War that is being waged by the Russian regime against substantial portion of the outside world. Next point, it started, Katya started with that. Everything started in November year 2013. For many people who went to Maidan, who started to defend the choice of a majority of the Ukrainian people, yes, for many of them, everything started in November year 2013. It is not for Mr. Putin. For Mr. Putin, everything started, at least to my recollection, certainly I was not in this kind of the very beginning, but to my recollection, started at least in year 2003. In year 2003, Mr. Putin, in the discussion in Kremlin, was telling some people who were there that, those who are familiar with the Russian history know that, okay, there is such expression, Kiev is the mother of Russian cities, kind of the cradle of the Russian statehood and the Russian civilizations, or now it would be more, or ancient Russian state. And at that time he said, okay, it looks like it's wrong, that the cradle of the Russian statehood lies beyond Russian borders. It is necessary to correct it. You can imagine what ways could be used to correct the situation. On our part, we try to to change this the way of thinking, just to remind that yes, it's true. Kiev was the capital of this ancient Russian state for several centuries, but before that, actually, even earlier capital of this ancient Russian state was in Novgorod, in Great Novgorod, which is now the territory of the Russian Federation, and that is fine. So just even from any point of view, it's creating historic narrative or the historical fables that would suit extremely patriotic people, that is fine. But even more, the very first place in which the first Russian prince used as a site, as a capital, was a little town on Volkhov River to the north of Great Novgorod is Staraya Ladoga. Very nice, beautiful city. It's just the place where was the really original first capital of the very ancient Russian state. And we were able even to convince Mr. Putin to visit that place a couple of times. It was trying to use even just for for patriotic legend or whatever. It would be good, but after some time it became clear that it does not suit him. Later we found that from his perspective, that's not only his, but from also some Russian Orthodox priests who successfully convinced him that each country, especially such a great country like Russia, should have own holy places. Like, okay, Muslims have their holy place in Mecca, some different confessions do have a holy place in Jerusalem and in some other places. Russia does not have something that could be considered as the holy places. And the only holy places for the Russian Orthodox confession or religion from this regards located in two places. One in Khersones, or Korsun in ancient Russian, which is currently Sevastopol. It's a part of the urban area of Sevastopol, right in Crimea. And another one is Kievo-Pechorskaya Abbey in Kiev. So that is why these holy places should be under the Russian state. And it sounds even today, it sounds like a really some fantasies, very strange fantasies in this kind of 21st century. But that fantasies have been, as we have seen, some kind of implemented as real policy of the state. So the very first plan for some kind of implementing this plan of putting holy places of Russian, of the kind of Orthodox church or Orthodox religion under the Russian control have been attributed, could be attributed to year 2004. And the very first attempt was some kind of was an attempt to implement it during the Orange Revolution of year 2004, year 2005. But that time it was clear that nothing is prepared. And the next point was year 2010 presidential election, when they have calculated that would be some kind of close competition between two candidates, Mrs. Tymoshenko and Mrs. Yanukovych. And they calculated that if, let's say, Mrs. Tymoshenko would win few percentage points over Mr. Yanukovych, that would be very good opportunity to start operations that will, against Ukraine, with the occupation and annexation of Crimea, the first stage, and after that with the military operation against the rest of the Ukraine. Actually, the very first military plan that has been leaked to the open media has been published in Russia in April year 2008. And those who are interested, I would recommend to read this document under the title Mechanical Orange. I don't know whether it is a kind of attribution to the very famous book and movie or to this kind of Orange Revolution. Nevertheless, it's explained in details which particular divisions and brigades of Russian military forces should be used in different stages. And the first stage would be certainly occupation of Crimea, and after that using forces against Ukraine in eastern part of the country and after the central part of Ukraine with, attention, with the use of nuclear strike against Ukrainian troops southeast of Kiev. These articles have been published once again in Nezavisimaya Gazeta in Russia in April year 2008. That time probably not very many people paid any attention to these documents. But this was a kind of leaked version of one of the versions of the plan of the general staff of the Russian military forces. So next, as we know, in year 2010, not Mrs. Tymoshenko won few percentage points over Mr. Yanukovych, but Mr. Yanukovych won 3 percentage points over Mrs. Tymoshenko. So that is why instead of some kind of conquering one by one pieces of Ukrainian territory, the decision has been made, okay, let's have, if Mr. Yanukovych is elected, let's have whole Ukraine. And what has been explained already, so just with so-called Kharkiv agreement, with a kind of agreement on gas, agreement on the Black Sea Fleet, Putin received almost everything that he could get from Ukraine. But it was not enough, because plan was again Sebastopol, or Khersones, and Kiev. So that is why this next stage has been planned for year 2015 presidential election in Ukraine. That was scheduled for February year 2015. But the development in Maidan in year 2030 and some accelerating these events, and that is why they started this process early. But actually, it's even started even earlier than the actual implementation of this plan. The official announcement of the war against in Ukraine happened more than 1 year ago, on July 27, year 2013. That day, Mr. Putin visited Kiev and had some kind of, on a case of the 1025th anniversary of the Christianity or baptism of Russia, of Ukraine, of Belarus. And he has made very, very clear state with using very necessary semantic instruments to announce that from that day, Russia really starts, or Kremlin regime starts the war against Ukraine. 2 days later, Mr. Nishenko, this kind of the chief sanitary doctor of Russia, started this kind of the sanitary sanctions against Ukrainian goods. A few days later, started the kind of financial sanctions, economic sanctions, the kind of embargo on import of Ukrainian goods. So I'm kind of trying to push Ukraine from the some kind of the stage that was close to stagnation into recession. And the kind of it's one of the economic instruments to push Ukraine and the Ukrainian nation and Ukrainian society and Ukrainian government into decisions that would some kind of please Mr. Putin. As we know what happened after that with forcing Mr. Yanukovych to cancel signing of the agreement with the European Union. But it started once again on July 27, year 2030. I would probably not discuss because it's many elements of the so-called hybrid war or irregular war or non-conventional war. That is some kind of the concept that has been developed in the Russian General Staff over the last several years. That's a kind of some kind of sophisticated concept how to achieve the political aims with using not only open military force but with some kind of new elements of the some kind of actions that traditionally are not considered yet as the military actions, using like an information campaign, disinformation campaign, using corruption, in using some kind of cyber war, just many different ways, some kind of subversive actions, terrorist actions, using the mass protest and mass rallies in the targeted country just to get the result. Military actions definitely could happen, but it could happen only at the very last stage of the hybrid war. So military plan, so I'm not discussing all these and kind of the elements of hybrid war that have been used against Ukraine. We have seen it also in Maidan with kind of the officers from FSB organizing and kind of this shooting of the protesters, these 100 people. There was a kind of the division of labor. So kind of the physical shooting was done, looks like now by the Ukrainian troops, but the organization, the plan has been done by Russian FSB, and according to some sources, almost half of the central apparatus from Moscow spent these 3 months in Kiev, some kind of organizing this war against Ukrainian Maidan. But the some kind of strictly military phase in this war has been launched on February 20th, year 2014. Once again, just those who remember the dates, and Yulia just mentioned that people on Maidan celebrating on 21st the victory. It started one day early, actually a couple of days early, but on February 20th. And when Putin and others are saying, okay, some kind of our actions, which is certainly a very strange statement, but no, our actions was a response to the overthrow of Yanukovych, this Maidan revolution, and so on. It is a complete lie. Yanukovych left country on February 23 and 23rd. The agreement that has been signed by Yanukovych with 3 opposition leaders and with 3 ministers of foreign affairs from Europe on 21st. But the military operation that Russian General Staff and the Russian Minister of Defense started against Crimea was on February 20th. So it's before Yanukovych fled Ukraine, before Yanukovych signed this agreement. So this was action against Yanukovych, the most pro-Russian, pro-Putin would be more correctly, president of Ukraine. So that is why, with all due respect to some kind of this narrative, it has been done regardless what has been achieved on Maidan, what has been done with Yanukovych. It was a very old plan. And just to confirm this fact of this beginning of this operation, the Russian Minister of Defense coined the special medal for returning the Crimea, on which they put the dates when they started this operation, February 20th, year 2014. The beginning of the operation. Okay, one again, I skipped a lot of stuff. There was also mentioned so-called referendum, which is being called in Ukraine and in some Russian circles not in the way of occupandum, but kind of the so-called this poll under the guns of the Russian troops. What is the strategic aim of Putin in Ukraine? It's very clear. There is given only some kind of 2 choices. Either Ukraine should be under control of Mr. Putin, or Ukraine should not exist as independent and sovereign state. It's according to his logic. So that is why what we have seen through all these months and through Maidan and through more than 6 months of open military operation of the Russia of Kremlin regime against Ukraine. This is a particular purpose. And for this particular purpose, there were several stages. First of all, there were subversive actions, and especially in Crimea and South Ukraine and East Ukraine. There was the capture of many administrative buildings, police buildings, security buildings, and so on. Supply of weapons to this area. Actually, the very first some kind of confirmation, at least what I've seen, of the creation by FSB, so-called underground army of Donbass, can be attributed to year 2009. If you look into the YouTube, you will find the video that's kind of the people kind of who claim to be so-called separatists. Okay, they started this preparation already in year 2009, and they're kind of demonstrating their guns. They're demonstrating that what they're going to use and how they kind of going to some kind of use these weapons against Ukraine. After that, supply of militants. After that, diplomatic pressure on Ukraine and Europe to force some kind of to recognize the so-called Donbass Republic, or that is terrorist organizations in Donetsk or Lugansk, or what is the favorite title for Mr. Putin, the so-called Novorossiya. And finally, just to get to achieve these results, terrorism. And those who think that the Malaysian air jet, actually it's not so much Malaysian, but the jet that left Amsterdam has been shot by separatists from East Ukraine, are making a very serious mistake, because this book system has never been given to separatists. The Russian officers who are operating this very sophisticated and very powerful system never left some kind of the management, the operation of this system to any separatist. None of those separatists, whoever they are, never get access to this powerful system. All orders that they fulfill, these officers, orders from the Russian general staff. And that is why there's a very particular purpose to to commit this terrorist act, to produce a shock and terror in European capitals, that European societies and the European civil society would produce necessary pressure for Ukrainian authorities to stop fighting terrorists in east of the country, and to recognize and legitimize this terrorist creation on the east of Ukraine that is shown on this map. As I already said, this is a Ukrainian campaign. Is just very important certainly for Ukraine, and this is a kind of existential threat for the existence of the country and for the nation. But this is only introductory chapter for a much larger event that Kremlin propaganda people already explained. This is the Fourth World War. And in the Fourth World War, their aim is to fight not the West, when some people claim so, who did not listen carefully. Their purpose to attack the part of the, first of all, to divide the Western security alliance in two parts, and to to fight what they called Anglo-Saxon world, in which they include United States, UK, Canada, now Australia, and the so-called front state, Poland, plus 3 Baltic states, plus Romania, Georgia, and so on. They think that it is impossible to achieve any agreement with the Anglo-Saxon world, and that is why Anglo-Saxon world should be destroyed. The other part of the Western Alliance, which is mainly continental Europe, headed by Germany, from their point of view, it's somebody who can be considered as at least neutral participant in this Fourth World War, or in the best case, even ally of Putin's Russia. And leaving aside to what extent that is kind of rational thinking, but this is the purpose that has been many times announced, and we can see the particular actions that has been undertaken in achieving this particular purpose. Anglo-Saxon, this fight against Anglo-Saxon world is necessary from the point of view of this Kremlin's war, because the immediate aim is a so-called unification of the largest divided nation or largest divided people in the world. So Mr. Putin went on April 17th on the kind of the his main speech about Novorossiya, about this kind of largest divided people, I mean Russians. So this is an absolute 100% repetition, the copy of the speeches that Hitler made in 1930s. This is exactly the copy of the Nazi propaganda of the 1930s. It's exactly the copy of the propaganda of Hungarian fascists in the interwar period. And this is exactly the approach that Milosevic did in the early 90s for some kind of creation of the Great Serbia. So this is exactly very same approach, same plea. I would recommend to look into the article that has been published late April year 2014 in the Russian Open Press, which is called Frontiers of Novorossiya, or the Borders of Novorossiya, in which you will see the list of countries that should fall into this Russian world and should be taken under the control of the Kremlin regime. So we can discuss this as well, but now we can think what can be done about this. Now the world attention is concentrated on sanctions, or I would call so-called sanctions, because those sanctions are absolutely, from my point of view, are very limited, very shallow, very late, not very serious, and do not produce any effect on changing behavior in Kremlin. The only way that sanctions could be useful and effective if US and European Union would use this instrument in a full swing and full capacity on February 27th, when the Russian troops captured the building of the parliament in Simferopol in Autonomous Republic of Crimea. If that day, or just really a few days after that, United States and European Union would freeze foreign exchange assets of the Russian Federation, which that time were on the accounts in the US banks and in Europe, that could have some effect. But after that, all these reserves have been transferred to other places, and it is too late. Now we're facing real war. Yesterday, the National Security Council of Ukraine has announced that, according to their estimates, the number of real Russian troops, not only militant, but real regular Russian troops in East Ukraine, at least 15,000 troops. We are not going to have war, as Mrs. Merkel mentioned. We already have war, and we're having not small war, we're having big war. We have a really big war in Europe. And those who understand this fact that is a war, and who are able to respond to war in war terms and in war instruments, they could have chance to limit cost and limit price of this war. It's not a case that, okay, whether we shall have war or not shall have. We're already having war. The question now, not about to have or not to have war. The question now, how to reduce, if it is possible, the almost unavoidable price and cost of this war.
Thank you, Andrea. It is always fascinating to hear Andrei speak, and I hope that we will be able to hear more views from him during our discussion. Now I'd like to open the floor. We have 25 minutes for the discussion and for questions. And I also would like to, we are lucky to have a number of CDDRL fellows in the room, and specifically from the countries that are represented on this map. And I'd like to welcome the views from the fellows from Russia, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan to the panel. So we'd like Nino, Tamar, and then we will take questions in circles of 3, okay?
I want to make, as the organizer of this conference, a small information and clarification, because you know, this panel was like a force majeure situation because the Ukrainian delegation cannot came at this event, and from the Georgian officials whom were invited, tomorrow morning they left for the Wealth Summit, and this is only reason why this panel was designed on this regard, and it was like some comments about that.
It was not some, it was my comment.
Yeah,
and I believe there are some political figures left still in Georgia who could have been suggested to speak at this kind of...
Yes, it was our choice with whom we sent invitation, and this was only reason why they are not participating today's a conference panel. Yeah, sorry, it's just for information.
No, thank you, Nino. I think it's a very important clarification, and thank you for that. Would you mind passing the microphone, Nino? Can we get a microphone here, please? Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. My question goes to Andrei. Well, I see you are extremely skeptical towards the sanctions, but I would still ask you to elaborate on what was the effect on Russian economy of already adopted sanctions. I understand that they didn't have any effect on the behavior of the Kremlin, but what was the effect of the economy? And also another question, there are some skeptics who believe that, okay, we have Cuba who's been sanctioned for many decades, and North Korea, and they continue to exist and behave the same way they behaved before. So do you share the opinion of those skeptics who say that there is no way sanctions could at all sort of affect the behavior of Putin? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think if you don't mind, let's take a circle of 3 questions and then answers, and then another circle. There was a hand at the back, and then if you don't mind, you, and please identify yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Tornika Sharashenin, the Professor of International Relations. I want to address my question to Mr. Ilarianov, because you know Mr. Putin better than anyone in this room, I believe. From what we heard from you, we understand now that there are too many similarities between Hitler's Germany and Putin's Russia, and that Putin, like Hitler, is becoming increasingly paranoid and irrational and insecure. But I want to ask about one thing. I remember in 2006 and 2007 there were various reports about how Putin was about Putin's plan to modernize Russian economy, to invest some $1 trillion in Russian infrastructure and so on. So was it really serious? How do you think? And what happened in 2007 and 2008 that these plans to modernize Russian economy were completely scrapped, and Russia focused after the war with Georgia on rebuilding its armed forces? And if anything like that happened, do you think that Putin's behavior would be now different from what we see now? Because as we know, individuals shape actually history, and they play a crucial role in history. And Putin's influence on current history is simply overwhelming. And was it that something happened with Putin's personality in this period of time? Or was it that he understood that Russia could not be simply modernized, and he still had to focus on, let's say, traditional Russian strengths, rely on brutal force and not economic strengths and soft power?
Thank you. We will take the 3rd question from that, and you will be the first one in the 2nd round, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Easy Presley, Czech national, working here for NATO liaison office. I've got maybe a provocative question. I would like to draw your attention to one fact connected to former President Yanukovych. And before doing that, I would like to underline that, not to be accused otherwise, I would like to underline that, of course, I'm in, let's say, I support the Maidanist, I support the, let's say, pro-Western course of Ukraine. If I was Ukrainian, I would, of course, be in Maidan too. And I'm working for NATO, so no doubt about my, let's say, support of Ukraine. But I think that we, as democratic countries, gave one very easy argument to Russia, and that's the argument that Mr. Yanukovych, the former president, was ousted unconstitutionally. And that's something that is not discussed much in our media, because President Yanukovych, no matter what he did, he was a democratically elected president. I looked at the OSCE results when they observed the elections. He was a democratically elected president, no matter whether he liked him or not. And he actually was ousted on contrary to the constitution. No matter whether he left the country prior to it or afterwards, there's many opinions on this. When we look at the constitution, I think it's Article 111, Ukrainian constitution, it defines clearly how many votes of the MPs must be in favor of the ouster of the president, I mean of his, let's say, impeachment. And this number was not met. Actually, it was voted by the majority of the MPs, but the majority of MPs, according to the Ukrainian constitution, is not enough. And the Ukrainian constitution defines clearly what actually must be done to oust the president, to actually impeach the president. There's deadlines, a few weeks deadlines. There's committees, parliamentary committees that need to meet. And nothing of these conditions were met. So actually he was ousted contrary to the constitution. And if you listen to President Putin, if you look at Russian channels, what he says, he uses this argument all the time. Like this, the president was ousted contrary to the constitution. And that's something I think that, this is the argument that we gave to Russia for free, and they still use it. And I don't wonder they use it because, they have some, let's say, solid base for this. So can you please comment on this? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Shall we start, Igor?
I think I'm afraid that this question shows that at least my presentation was unconvincing for sure, because the whole point is that we shouldn't fall in this Orwellian discourse traps of Russia. It doesn't matter for Putin at all whether it was constitutional or not. If we don't take seriously his Orwellian arguments, this is not the point at all. The French Revolution and American Revolution were the most anti-constitutional events of the history of the democracy. I mean, what's the point? The dictator was shooting people on the street. He committed treason. There is no constitution which protects the tyrant from killing its own citizen. There is nothing like that. But regardless, what? Rule of law when people are shot on the streets? How? If you are shooting people on the street, who will put him in trial? Come on, this is completely unrealistic. But even prior to this surrealist discussion that we have now, that when people are killed on the street, somebody should file a lawsuit in the court. The biggest trap is to try to argue with Putin propaganda on these Orwellian arguments about whether it was constitutional or not. It is completely pointless to do that. The core problem is the attempt of Putin to suppress the statehood, sovereignty, and any attempt of successful democracy on its immediate neighborhood as part of his plan to destroy the European security order. Whether the way Mr. Ilarionov suggests that to use the divided impera with the non-Anglo-Saxon parts as being more susceptible to alliance, I'm not going into that direction. It's a very interesting view, but to shatter that. And please, especially from the NATO point of view, and I understand you are talking in personal capacity, don't fall into that trap to start to argue about, are there Russian troops really? I mean, who are the people who are in Crimea? I mean, if they don't wear the insignias, they might not be considered as an invasion. This is all part of the reasons of the profound failure in the last 10 years of the Western and free world's interest in this region.
I think Yulia wanted to add on that question.
I just want to tell you how the laws were violated. Just few examples from my personal experience from the revolution. We spent a night staying near the court where a young poet, 23 years old, were in jail for 2 months and then in prospect for 12 years under the new laws for wearing blue-yellow ribbon and walking on the streets. And that's during the revolution. And you know what was before the revolution? You could buy any decision of the court what you want, anything. Yanukovych was violating these laws step by step. He just took a part of our country and put it in his pocket. And if we will wait 2 years more, we will end with nothing. Even at that moment, we had no laws which worked. We had no real representatives of people, because these guys, they were supporting such a stuff that you can't even put in your head. Like women who were raped on the military basis, not military, police basis. You know that revolution started not on Maidan, it started actually on Mykolaiv. I think so. Like it was people's protest against this violence. And that's why it's very hard to judge him as a normal president, as someone who stay under the law. He's not. Thank you.
Thank you, Yulia. If you allow me for a 1-minute intervention of using my power as a moderator, the procedure of ousting Yanukovych was not an impeachment procedure. He was dismissed by the resolution of the parliament. And Ukraine, well, since there are many precedents, and Ukraine has not had a precedent of such ousting democratically, as you rightfully pointed out, president who was elected in 2010 in national elections, has a precedent. Thus, judging this case in particular, I think we should leave for the constitutional lawyers. However, the answer to that, it was not an impeachment procedure. And the impeachment procedure is absolutely right. It's complex, written out. It should take 2 sessions of the Parliament of Ukraine to proceed with the impeachment of the president. Never been implemented in Ukraine. But if you look at the broader spectrum, then the question would be, was Yanukovych a legitimate president after the reversal of the changes of the Constitution of 2004? That's another question. Put it in a broader perspective. Thank you. And now with that, if you don't mind, I'll pass the floor to Andrei, because the 2 other questions were addressed to him.
But even I'll tell a little bit of my comments on this issue as well. Just let's reconstruct. I'll try to be from the pretty legal point of view, precisely legal point of view. I think what has been said by my colleagues is absolutely correct, but nevertheless, from purely legal point of view. On February 21st, Mr. Yanukovych and 3 leaders of opposition have signed an agreement in presence and also with participation of 3 ministers of foreign affairs from European countries. According to this agreement, the official some kind of confirmation of signatures, Yanukovych should be given within 48 hours. That just this agreement, because it's the most important political agreement that would some kind of intended to end these clashes on the streets of Kyiv. There's a very clear obligations on all sides, on sides of opposition and on side of Yanukovych. It was very clear that he officially and publicly, he promised to sign these documents and to make this law in 48 hours. The agreement has been signed about 5 p.m. on February 21st. So that is why before 5 p.m., February 23rd, he had obligation to sign this document. What happened after that? As we know, in the very late evening, 21st, he flew to Kharkiv, where he disappeared. He became unavailable for any contacts for his own presidential administration. Not from opposition, not from mass media, not from public audience, from own presidential administration. He was supposed to speak next morning on February 22nd in Kharkiv in the big congress of the southeastern regions. And people expected them, even not people from Maidan, people that should support and expected to support him from east and south of Ukraine. He did not appear in the Congress of Kharkiv. He did not appear anywhere through the whole day of 22nd. He was not found anywhere in this 22nd. As we learned later, he spent night somewhere from 22nd to 23rd. As we learned after that, already in Crimea and the premises of one Orthodox abbey. But it was known later. As soon as some rumors or some kind of information that Yanukovych already not in Kharkiv but in Crimea, after that Mr. Nalivachenko and Mr. Avakov knew some representative of new authorities, without yet dismissing them, flew to Crimea to find Mr. Yanukovych. As soon as Yanukovych learned that Nalivachenko and Avakov are flying to Crimea, he kind of changed his route on his motorcade, some kind of dismissed most of his bodyguards and boarded the Russian Navy ship, and in the very late night on February 23rd left the Ukrainian territory. The question now arises, okay, that person, just aside, took obligations to sign the most important political document of his life and for his country. He did not fulfill these obligations. He disappeared from even his own people, and even nobody was able to reach him. What country in this stage of revolution, of this kind of classic, should do in these particular circumstances? And he left the physical territory of the country, not giving any instruction, not giving any contact, doing nothing. What should people do in this regard? And what actually the Ukrainian parliament did in this regard, they did not appoint president, they appointed acting president until the new president will be elected in free, open, transparent and competitive election. And that was the decision has been taken in parliament. It's probably not perfect from purely legal point of view, I would agree. But could you give me any other option, what some kind of people in Ukraine should do in this particular situation if the person, actually it was not even, there is no provision in the Ukrainian constitution because nobody could imagine that the person who's been elected as a president would just run from the country on the board of the some kind of foreign navy ship. Okay, two other small questions, kind of. Effect of sanctions, or so-called sanctions, I would say, they're just zero. It's negligible. There is no effect on the Russian economy. It's no effect on the behavior of Mr. Putin, on the Kremlin's position. Just no. And it could not be achieved. Once again, it's very small, it's very limited, it's just few people, few companies and so on. It's not for the Russian economy. It is not possible. Why? Because the purpose of those sanctions, as many people from US and from Europe are saying, not to change course in Kremlin, but, just listen, quotation, to inflict pain. Just, you would think, just many people were saying, President Obama, many people from the US administration, some people from Europe would say, okay, our purpose of sanctions is to inflict pain. All right. Okay, if their purpose to inflict pain, probably they achieve something, because Mr. Putin once said that the wife of Mr. Timchenko, of his some kind of fellow, was not able to use her credit card when she was kind of in some kind of head dress parlor, whatever. All right, she had very big pain about this. All right, she had pain, nothing, not a, that's all. So the real changes for the kind of for Russian people started with sanctions imposed by Mr. Putin on the Russian people with food embargo, food import embargo, right? Yes, true, but it's a different story. So the purpose of this called the Western sanctions to inflict pain. I used usually the kind of this comparison. To inflict pain is a kind of to poke the bear into this pork, okay, with a needle. All right, okay, what would be behavior of bear after that? All right, so it's not the purpose to change the behavior, but the more on a more serious basis, kind of, you already started to mention those countries that have been under sanctions: Cuba, North Korea, Iraq, Iran. For years, they were under very comprehensive, massive sanctions, like kind of complete embargo of export from Iraq, or very limited for Iran, or no trades with North Korea, and so on. And what we can see, just those sanctions continue for years and even for decades. In the case of Cuba, for example, or North Korea. What is the result? No result, zero. And just compare, those countries, with all due respect, are much smaller than Russia. They have much less diversified economies than Russia. Russia is much richer, is much larger, has much more diversified economy, has many more contacts with other countries that are not participating in any sanctions at all. With China, with India, with the Third World, and so on. The question is very simple. If much massive and much more powerful sanctions did not have any effect, or almost no effect, on behavior of leaders of this kind of these authoritarian tyrants in those countries, of much smaller countries, why much smaller in-size sanctions, much shallower sanctions, would have any effect on a much larger country with much more actually aggressive leader? So the answer is very clear. There will be no results. So that is why the sanctions, it's a sanctions game. For many Western leaders, it's a kind of opportunity to demonstrate this and kind of the public attitude. Right, it's good, it's a symbolic gesture, but only symbolic gesture. There is no real gesture. So that's no effect. As for the so one of the question about this kind of modernization of the Russian economy, first of all, I'm saying that just it's not from my personal knowledge, it's a public information available to everybody. We should not waste much time on this kind of the propaganda topic that is being used by Kremlin. Okay, modernization of the Russian economy. In reality, more than 20 trillion rubles, it's a kind of, it's almost 700 billion US dollars, have been assigned for military escalation, for development of military troops and for military industrial complex several years ago. And this fulfilling this purpose, and is more important than anything else. But even in the case of really serious war, as we right now, as I would repeat it again, so even if Mr. Putin would achieve success in modernization of the Russian economy, it would mean that as a modernization of economy of aggressor, and it would make the case of fighting aggressor much harder for those who happen to be either victim of those aggression or for those who are fighting this aggressor. So now we're actually dealing not with the kind of the statements or programs or purposes that have been announced by Mr. Putin or whoever else early on. Now we're really having war that is being waged now already actually, because the Russian-Georgian war is not finished, because there is no anything that is being considered as any kind of peace settlement, real peace settlement, and we have another war against Ukraine. A few days ago, Mr. Putin said very clearly that he does not consider Kazakhstan as having any serious statehood. He is going to build this kind of land corridor to Transnistria, claiming that Transnistria is a kind of old Russian lands and so on. So we're having the operations against a number of countries. And we should think, first of all, about how it is possible to stop aggressor in all these already waged wars against neighboring countries.
Thank you, Andrei. We effectively done with the time allocated for the panel, but if organizers permit, we will spill over. Since we are in democratic environment, I'd like to warn you that this will be at the expense of your coffee break. So with that, I'd like to move to the second and maybe last round of questions, and I'd like to start with you, then Grigori and Victor.
Thank you very much, and of course I'll try to be very short. First of all, let me thank our Ukrainian friend for sharing not only thoughts, but first of all, the passion that you have when you're speaking about dignity of your country, and I think that's something that I do really envy at this moment in my country. I think this panel reflects two major problems that we're facing with Ukraine. One of a smaller scale, but very painful to me, and another much of a bigger scale. The smaller scale, by smaller scale I mean the absence of Georgian government from this panel, and there is no technical explanation of nobody sitting here from the Georgian government when we are discussing the future of not Crimea, Ukraine, but of the future of the whole world and my country, freedom of my country. And I think that's not just an accidental absence, but it's a part of a shameful and very dangerous policy of my government at this moment. In this respect, let me also ask you a question. What particularly Georgian government and Georgian country can do in this crisis? And there are sets of challenges that you have been discussing, like information war, a wall of bureaucracy in Brussels, which I fully share. So in practical terms Georgia can do today to fight, not to help you, it's not a right explanation, but to fight the war that really belongs to all of us. And now the second, a much bigger problem. When we are hearing today from a NATO office representative, a representative of Czech Republic, questions about, very legitimate questions about constitutionality of ousting Yanukovych, I think it's a very, very big problem of really not understanding what it's at stake. And I think instead of discussing now what should be done at Well Summit or what should be done by Europe in a better way to protect themselves, not us and not Ukraine, we have shifted discussion to persuading a NATO representative what we're talking about today, what is wrong and what is right, the very simple things. So I think it's a very big problem that reminded of very unfortunate conversation that I had several weeks ago in Brussels when an acting diplomat asked me a question about the similar question about constitutionality and rule of law in the process in Ukraine. You know how the conversation ended eventually when he ran out of arguments? He told me directly that he had 2 dachas in Russia and he's afraid of losing them. And that's very unfortunate, but it's true.
Thank you for your honest statement. What I'd like to do, the NATO representative who you addressed would like to have a right to respond, and if you don't mind, we will do it after the round of questions. Okay, Grigory, please.
Thank you. My name is Gregory, and I come from Moscow. So Moscow was mentioned so many times yesterday, and I was shutting myself up during the presentations of Georgian politicians, although I had something to say. And today, Moscow was also mentioned many, many times, and I don't want to comment on aggressors, on Putin thing. I come from human rights circles, let's say, we are media which covers Caucasus, Caucasian North. I want to say about something what is missing in this panel, what I believe. I don't want to talk about aggression, although I strongly believe if Russian army is inside of Ukraine, that's definitely aggression. But what is missing here in this panel? It was called the situation in Ukraine. I would like to hear more about those people who are suffering. I would like to know more, not about what was happening with Yanukovych, with Putin, who made a trip on a boat and when. I would like to know more what's now with those people who are suffering. What about the rule of law? What about international standards? Not because I want to cite to any sign of a conflict, just because that's the essential missing point, that people who live there, I don't really care very much who is shooting, although there are guilty people and international criminal court would find out one day who was shooting. I think we need to attract attention as people who are here with this CDDRL kind of umbrella. What about those people? What kind of help they need? How many refugees? How many people are suffering right now? Not because we need with this focus sign to any sign, to Ukrainian sign, to Russian sign, just because we can't miss the people who are suffering right now when we are discussing this point. And yes, probably there are military means which are needed to be taken in Ukraine. I understand that. But what the response of international community towards those people who are leaving their country, who don't want to live and suffering, who are getting killed both by rebels, by Ukrainian army, maybe by Russian troops, what about them? Thanks.
Before you, did I just hear you say if Russian troops are in Ukraine, or I misheard?
Yes, I just said that because I've read the Reuters report about Russian troops, but after the Reuters report about Russian troops, I heard yesterday that BBC reported about OSCE making no statement about Russian troops. I would be happy to read more information about this, but that was not my point, again.
I think that's
I strongly believe that it is important. It is important. It is important to support Ukraine, Ukrainian sovereignty, but it is also important
I
to
just wanted to clarify whether I misheard you or not. Now I see I didn't. That's it before I respond to it.
Thank you for the question, Grigory, because people comes first, and I think we will respond. The last question in this round, and then Victor.
Okay. My name is Victor Wanda from China, Stanford fellow. Andrew, you mentioned that Putin felt Russia need a holy place. I also heard that over the last couple of years he's getting ever more conservative, he has to see his priest on weekly basis. What made those kind of changes? It seems 10 years ago, he relatively open-minded to Western. Even President Bush said, I can see through this guy's eyes, I can trust him. And what made those kind of changes? One of the conventional wisdom said, you know, he initially wanted to be one of the Western boys, and Western boys really don't play along with him. So he said he now felt he needed to find his own cultural roots. Is that true? The second question is to Yulia and Giga, that how do you see China's role in this conflict? Do you, from Ukrainian people's point of view, you think China is doing the right thing? Are they siding with Russia, or they are more sort of doing the thing they should do? I just want to get your opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. And Professor Jensen wanted to add to that, and if you don't mind for your last remark in the circle of questions, and Victor, would you please pass the microphone? And then we'll go with the answers, and then we'll give the right to
I just want to comment briefly on constitutionalism. Constitutionalism in an unconstitutional world is problematic. The average lifespan of a constitution, and we've got regressions on constitutions of the world, 780 constitution data set, is 19 years. And I just looked up, it's coincidental, but the Ukraine constitution is 18 years old. There is also two sort of legal points. One is popular sovereignty. What is the will of the people? And deconstruct legitimacy through the will of the people. A second comment, and this is what constitutional lawyers do, we create legal fictions. For example, when there is a revolution, when there is a military takeover, a court will usually, after those events, say that they will refer to a doctrine of necessity, which is an entire legal fiction. It's, we've got to create a continuity, constitutional continuity through a political event. And they do that by retrospectively saying, well, the doctrine of necessity justifies it. Just a couple of comments.
Thank you. In order to, I think it will be more logical if you take the floor now for a minute or two,
Right.
and then we'll move on with the responses to the questions.
Just a very brief, quick reaction. 2 points. I'm sure that everyone here understood that what I've said, it's neither Czech or NATO position. It's just the discussion, my input to the discussion. That's why I raised the question. So I don't think there's a need to be alarmed. That's the first thing. I think everyone understood it. And second thing is democracy. Democracy is also raising critical questions to what we have done. And that's democracy. So that's these 2 points. Thanks.
Thank you. Giga.
I fully agree this time. But our response to your question was part of democracy too, isn't it?
Sorry, there was a reaction to the previous speaker.
Oh, that too is part of democracy too, I think. So, and I think we still fall in this trap, despite the excellent explanation that we heard about the Constitution now. I will still insist that it's a self-defeating direction to argue about the procedures and lawsuits when there is a situation which was there during Maidan. And by the way, I haven't mentioned, but I meant it, in any case, how is it connected with any justification of a foreign country's military invasion and aggression? How, by which constitution or which international standard? There is none. And I'll close with that, and again, with all respect to your views, obviously, but I think we are at the emotional moment, and some of the views could be considered as very dangerous ones. That's part of democracy too. So, can I still try to steal a bit of thunder about the question about Putin and religion a bit from the beginning, completely admitting that Mr. Ilarionov is an expert and I'm a complete amateur. Just to bring that one historic example, Stalin. I think my view is it's completely utilitarian choice. Like Stalin, before the beginning of World War II and during, deliberately initiated the ideological, let's say so, wave of bringing up all the patriotic examples, including the people who were considered anti-communist and anti-Soviet at the time, to utilize them for internal ideological reasons. Now, how much of the overlap then there can be, but when a person, a leader, chooses some ideological instrument and then gets really into his heart, I don't know. That I completely transfer to Mr. Ilarionov's judgment, but I think it's completely obvious that this is one of the clearly defined, articulated, thought through tools, and we see that in this country even more so than in Ukraine, because Ukraine is lucky that there is a very strong anti-Russian and pro-Western, let's say so, component in the clergy there, with Patriarch Filaret. And unfortunately, this is not the case in Georgia. And we see point by point a coordinated effort to undermine, on the soft power level, the consensus about Western choice being good for people. And of course, as we speak, the most tasty topic is the sexual minorities, and this is done, we know how, we know by which groups, to touch on the issues which have the deepest stigma in the societies everywhere, and maybe especially in Georgia compared to others, and to link them with the Western choice and then with geopolitical choice. So I believe it's a pure, instrumentalization of that, of those ideas. I don't want to miss any point which, OSCE and people. Yeah, before you, I will shortly respond to that. First, about OSCE, please, OSCE, with all respect to the institution and the idea of an institution as such, and people who worked and they have helped us a lot, people who were there during our troubles, but we all know it is an organization which can be blocked and jammed by Russia at any moment, just like UN. They depend on Russia, and one of the aspects of the troubles in Europe was that, especially after the 2008 war, all these institutions were put in an impossible situation because Russia broke off the fundamental premise of those institutions, the core architecture of it. So to reference to OSCE that they cannot confirm the invasion of Russia, I mean, I bet you, even if God forbid, and I hope it will never happen, Kiev is occupied, the OSCE might still don't have a consensus report on that. So should we judge it from that? I think the biggest problem is when we start to talk about if there is Russian invasion, A, and B, then use the humanitarian argument of fate of the people to distract the discussion from the major issue. The problem of people who are there is an invasion, an aggression, military aggression of another country. That's what should be addressed, and only after that we can speak about how to address the consequences of this bloody invasion. Just like during the Nazi invasion. It will be cynical to speak about how procedurally the rule of law issues are addressed during the Russian-German invasion of Poland. I mean, what's the relevance? These people now need assistance in their struggle against the aggressor. And that, of course, includes addressing the issue of IDPs, refugees, blood, and all those issues. And I cannot tell you, instead of our Ukrainian friends, I can tell you in Georgia, we have inside the country up to 300,000 IDPs for many years. And that's the situation we have.
Thank you.
They all need assistance.
Thank you, Giga. I think we're already spilling over beyond the coffee break, unfortunately, and I'd like to really ask you for a 30-second answer to the questions, because Nino, I apologize for spilling over. There was an interest and consensus in the room to do that.
First of all, Victor, your question about Chinese people and people's attitude to that. I'm not an expert, and I think maybe Kater will tell us more what's going on with it. But I know that people just want China to be active, because we understand that if Russia will feel pressure from that side, and your personal interests will be an issue, as a country, then it will be harder for them to pay so much attention on Ukraine. That's what we are talking inside the country. And about human rights and human rights violations, I think that's great that you asked this question. And you cannot imagine how much volunteers are working now in Kyiv and in the whole Ukraine, creating small groups who are helping IDPs, who are conducting food, who are conducting medicines. I was asked by a big Ukrainian company, what can we do by the people of the East? Should we rent a flat for them? Should we pay for their education or whatever? I'm sure that as soon as we will be free from troops on our ground, we will manage situation with human rights and with people in it. Thank you.
If I could add to that question and the statistics, there are currently 190,000 refugees. There are 2,152 killed, both civilians and servicemen. The estimates of refugees actually ranges from 170,000 to 730,000 people from the east of Ukraine. The problem of the IDPs is addressed from both sides, the volunteer organizations that Yulia mentioned and the state policy. That unfortunately the draft law that was actually not a good draft law on the internally displaced persons was vetoed by the president. Due to the election campaign, this law will not be considered or brought to the floor of the parliament before the elections. So in terms of the state policy, there is a big gap. In terms of the people, and that's, people is the real treasure of Ukraine. As of months ago, the number of donations, the amount of donations given by the regular citizens of Ukraine mounted to 940 million hryvnias, which accounts for over than $100 million towards the support of the army, medical needs, and other volunteer organizations. I know these are just dry numbers, but these are the numbers that we'd like to rely on, and we are hoping that it will be the state support towards this problem, and the problem of the violation of human rights is actually a separate problem, which probably will take outside and discuss separately, okay? Due to the lack of time.
Okay, very brief some of the issues. Concerning this so-called constitutionality, I think Mr. Putin is the last person who could ever speak on this issue. Mr. Putin has violated Russian constitution so many times and so kind of rudely that it's kind of absolutely impossible to to use his comments in any regard. The heaviest, the constitutional crime he has committed, it's this kind of third term. Russian constitution states very clear that any person could stay in the position of the Russian president only 2 terms. That's final point. And there is 2 decisions. One of the Constitutional Court of Russia that has decided the interpretation of the particular article in the Russian constitution is very clear. 2 terms and that's all. And another decision of Supreme Court of Russia with exactly the same conclusion. And the most interesting that the decision of the Constitutional Court has been signed by Mr. Zorkin, the current chair of the Constitutional Court, that is, clearly says that the 3rd term is unconstitutional. So that is why Mr. Putin, in violation of the Russian Constitution on the most important issue since year 2012. So that is why his view about this has very clear so-called validity. As for the question who is shooting, and I think it's a very important question. Not only who has been shot, but who is shooting. Who started shooting, who started invading, who is aggressor. This is the most important question. It is an important question in criminal investigations, who attacked and who is the victim. And the same for international relations, for international law. Who is attacking and who is the victim in this aggression. And in this particular case, we know Ukrainians did not shoot Russian soldiers, first. Ukrainians did not invade Russia. Ukraine did not have aggression against Russia. It was vice versa. So that is why we should be absolutely clear who is aggressor, who is shooting, and who is killing. As for Victor, your question, so just certainly it's a big debate about what particular factors influence decisions. I would say there is a combination of some kind of useful excuse for some kind of for this particular behavior, plus very clear imperial clergy in the Russian Orthodox Church. So this combination played very easily for Mr. Putin for justifying his particular course that he had much before that he has any intensive contacts with any particular priests. But it some kind of reinforces and strengthens his position in this regard. My last point would be on the position of Ukraine, and I would say not only Ukraine, but the overall international community in this regard. And I would use the words and just how to achieve peace. That's kind of my peace plan for Ukraine. We know that just if you meet gangster in the darkness of the night, who has a very clear intentions what to do with your property, with your possessions, with your health, with your kids, with your wife, or with your husband, or whatever, with your family, it's a very clear response. If you try to announce that, okay, there is a some kind of 1,000 red lines that gangsters should not cross, and if he crosses those lines, there will be sanctions in 3 months applied to the distant relative to this gangster, you are very likely will perish exactly at the same moment. The only way for you, it's not a guarantee, but the chance for you to survive for yourself and defend your family, defend the most darling for you, is just to fight. It's not a guarantee that you will win, but if you do not win, you definitely lose. So that is why I would use the words of Winston Churchill in his famous speech of June 4th, 1940s. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the streets. We shall fight on the hills. We shall fight on the sea. We shall fight wherever it is possible and impossible. But we will never surrender. Thank you.
I'd like to end this panel, and I'd like to thank the panelists, and I'd like to thank the audience who didn't sit through the panel, who didn't sleep through the panel, but who lived through the panel. Thank you for that. And in order to continue the Churchill note, Churchill also said, never, never, never give up. And this message is going to stay with us. Thank you very much. And apologies to the organizers.